When I prepared a feast to welcome my son's fiancée, I was hoping for a new beginning for our family. Instead, her first words to me were a cruel jab about my life. Age really is the scariest Halloween costume, isn't it? I guess you'll save a lot of money on a costume this year, won't you? My name is Amelia Thompson. I'm a 72-year-old retired social worker from Boulder, Colorado, and she had no idea. She just declared war on a woman who held a 25-year-old secret of hers. If my story touches your heart, I hope you'll share one of your own in the comments, because every one of us has a silent battle that deserves to be heard. It all started with hope, as most of life's tragedies often do. My hope, at that moment, smelled like herb-roasted chicken and baking apple pie. It was an October afternoon, the kind where Boulder's honey-gold sun spills over the mountainsides, painting the aspens a brilliant yellow. I'd spent the whole day preparing, not to impress, you understand, but to offer a genuine welcome. My son Leo was bringing his fiancée home to meet me. After his messy divorce 3 years ago, it was the first time I'd heard real excitement in his voice again, a sound so clear I thought I might never hear it again. For that reason alone, I wanted this dinner to be perfect. Our home, well, my home now is nestled on a small slope, built mostly from local pine and stone. My husband Michael had set every stone for the fireplace with his own 2 hands, and I can still feel his love in the rough-hewn floorboards beneath my feet. This place isn't just a building, it's an archive of memories. It's where Leo grew up, and it's where Michael took his last breath. Every corner whispers a story. And that night, I was hoping to start a new one, a happy new chapter for my son. I'd chosen the roast chicken recipe my mother taught me, with rosemary and thyme picked from my little garden out back. The apple pie was made from tart Granny Smith apples, with a crust that took me years to perfect, flaky and buttery. I set the table with the jade green ceramic dinnerware Michael and I had bought on a trip to Santa Fe years ago. They weren't a perfect match. Each plate had its own little nicks from time, but they told a story. I placed some yellow wild daisies in an old vase. Everything was ready. My heart, a heart that had grown accustomed to quiet, was beating with the lively rhythm of anticipation. At 6 o'clock sharp, the headlights of Leo's new Audi swept across the living room window. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my silver hair, which I'd put up in a neat bun, and smiled. This was it. This was the moment. I opened the door before they could even ring the bell, a warm smile already on my face. Leo looked so happy. His eyes were sparkling, his smile wide. But then my gaze shifted to the woman beside him, and my smile faltered just a bit. Veronica Vance. She was exactly as Leo had described, a sharp-edged kind of beautiful. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a severe, professional bun, not a single stray hair daring to escape. She wore a charcoal gray power suit, the silk blouse underneath a stark white. Everything about her was perfect, expensive, and cold. The energy she gave off was the complete opposite of my home's rustic warmth. "Mom, this is Veronica," Leo said, his voice full of pride. "Veronica, this is my mom, Amelia." I stepped forward, my arms open for the hug I wanted to give my future daughter-in-law, but Veronica took a slight, almost imperceptible step back and extended her hand instead. I felt a pang of disappointment, but took her hand. Her fingertips were ice cold, the handshake limp and over in a second. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice smooth but without a trace of warmth. "Please, call me Amelia, dear," I replied, trying to reclaim some of that warmth. Her eyes scanned my face, lingering for a moment on the wrinkles around my eyes and mouth, the roadmap of 72 years of laughter and tears. Then, a small, almost mocking smile touched her perfectly painted lips. "Age really is the scariest Halloween costume, isn't it?" The words floated out, light as air, but they landed in my mind like a ton of bricks. Leo let out an awkward chuckle. "Oh, Veronica, you're so blunt." But I knew it wasn't bluntness. It was a test, a way to see my reaction, to see if I was easily wounded. I'd worked with hurt children and dysfunctional families my entire life. I know how to recognize an act of aggression disguised as a joke. My smile froze on my face. I felt a chill run down my spine, despite the warmth radiating from the fireplace across the room. "Come on in," I said, my voice having lost its earlier cheer. "Dinner's almost ready." Inside, Veronica made no attempt to hide her judgment. Her eyes swept the living room like a laser scanner, cataloging every item: Michael's worn floral armchair, the black and white family photos on the mantel, the faded Killam rug. She wasn't looking at them as mementos, but as items at an estate sale. "This house has character," she remarked, and the way she said the word character made it sound like an insult. We sat down at the table. I placed the golden brown, steaming roast chicken in the center. Leo praised it with a whistle, but Veronica just gave it a detached look. "I don't usually eat animal skin," she said, carefully pushing the crispiest, most delicious part to the side with her fork. "Too much cholesterol." Throughout the meal, the quiet assault continued. When I poured the wine, she glanced at the label and said, "Leo told me you had a decent wine collection. I suppose this is your everyday bottle." When I brought out the apple pie, she politely declined. "I'm on a gluten-free diet." Leo, my poor boy, tried so hard to fill the awkward silences. He talked about his work as an architect, about his new projects, about how Veronica had motivated him. He talked nonstop, as if he was afraid that if he fell silent, the tension in the room would become a physical thing and suffocate us all. And Veronica, she just sat there, nodding occasionally, but her eyes were always moving, not looking at the person speaking, but at the things around her. "The location of this house is lovely," she said suddenly, cutting Leo off. "It's so quiet, but isn't it a bit inconvenient for development? I heard the city has plans to expand in this direction." I put my fork down. "I'm not interested in development, Veronica. I love the quiet here." "Oh, of course," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "But for a piece of land this large, it has enormous potential. An architect like Leo could turn this place into something spectacular." I heard those words. Enormous potential. Turn this into something. When she said that, I didn't hear a compliment. I heard the roar of a bulldozer, ready to level every memory I held dear. The evening's climax came when we were having tea in the living room. Leo was talking about his dream of designing a sustainable, eco-friendly home. Veronica was sitting in Michael's armchair, and it took every ounce of my willpower not to ask her to get up. She ran a hand absently over the worn fabric. "This house has good bones," she said, her tone like that of an appraiser. "But it needs to be liberated from all this old nostalgia. An open concept space, larger glass windows for the light. It could be a real gem." Liberated. That word echoed in my head. Liberated from whom? From Michael? From Leo's past? From me? By then, I had heard enough. The patience I had cultivated over 40 years in my profession was gone. I was no longer a social worker trying to mediate a family dispute. I was a mother, a widow, sitting in my own home being systematically insulted by a stranger. I slowly stood up. My movement silenced both Leo and Veronica. "I think our dinner is over," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had a steeliness that surprised even me. Leo blinked, confused. "Mom, it's only 8:30. "That's right," I said, looking directly into Veronica's eyes. "And I think you two should head home before it gets too dark. The mountain roads aren't easy to drive at night." Veronica was the first to understand. A flicker of surprise crossed her eyes, quickly replaced by a spark of amusement. She had gotten under my skin. She had gotten the reaction she wanted. She stood, smoothing down her wrinkle-free suit jacket. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "It was a very memorable evening." I didn't reply. I just walked to the door in silence and opened it. The cold night air rushed in, and I was grateful for it. It helped clear the tightness in my chest. Leo looked absolutely miserable. "Mom, I don't understand." "Good night, Leo," I interrupted, my voice softening just a little as I looked at my son. But that softness was not for the woman standing beside him. As they walked out, Veronica looked back at me over her shoulder. In the light from the porch, I saw a triumphant smirk flash across her face. The door closed, and I leaned against it, listening to the sound of the car's engine fade into the night. I stood there in the dark hallway for a long time, just trying to breathe evenly. The house suddenly felt too big, too quiet. The smell of roast chicken and apple pie still lingered, but it wasn't comforting anymore. It smelled like a false start. I went back to the dining room. 3 plates were still on the table, Mine and Leo's were nearly empty. Veronica's plate, with its cruelly skinned chicken breast and most of the food untouched, looked like an accusation. I cleared the table mechanically, every movement heavy. I wasn't angry. What I felt was worse than anger. It was the cold, clear realization that this dinner hadn't been an introduction. Sleep didn't come to me that night. I sat in Michael's armchair, curled up in the wool blanket I'd knitted for him during his last winter, but its warmth couldn't chase away the chill that had settled deep in my heart. The fire had died down to glowing embers, just like my hopes for a happy family evening. The smell of the food was still in the air, but now it just made me feel sick. It was the smell of failure, the smell of a love being used. I didn't dwell on Veronica's insults. Those words, as sharp as they were just symptoms. What kept me awake was the image of Leo, my son, sitting there, a forced smile on his face, trying to paper over his fiancée's rudeness with meaningless chatter. He heard what I heard, but he chose not to understand, or worse, he chose to ignore it. Love, I thought bitterly, doesn't sometimes make you blind. It makes you a coward. It makes you willing to sacrifice your self-respect, and even your family, to preserve an illusion of happiness. I'd seen it 100 times in my career, men and women clinging to toxic relationships because they were terrified of being alone. I just never thought my son would be one of them. The next morning, I woke before the sun was fully up. My 2-year-old body ached, not from age, but from the stress of a sleepless night. I cleaned up the last remnants of the dinner, scrubbing each plate and glass meticulously, as if removing the physical traces of Veronica could erase her toxic presence from my home. But I knew it was useless. She had left her mark, an invisible crack in my family's foundation. I made a strong pot of chamomile tea, its slightly bitter taste helping to ground me. I sat at my kitchen window, looking out at the backyard. The last of the autumn roses were still trying to hold on to their vibrant color before the winter came for them. Just like me, I thought. I would have to fight to protect what was left of mine. The phone rang at 9 o'clock. The sound was shrill, tearing through the quiet I was trying to build around myself. I looked at the screen. Leo's name flashed. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave him in silence to think for himself. But the mother in me, that foolish, hopeful part, won out. I answered, keeping my voice steady. "Hello, Leo." "Mom." His voice came through, and I knew instantly something was wrong. It didn't have its usual warmth. It was flat and distant, like he was speaking to a business associate, not his mother. "We need to talk about last night. I'm listening." I took a sip of my tea. It was cold now. "You really upset Veronica," he began, and I could just picture her sitting right beside him, whispering poison in his ear. "She was trying so hard to connect with you, but you were so defensive and negative." "Defensive?" I repeated, trying to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "I simply asked you to leave early." "That's not how she felt." Leo went on, his voice becoming more robotic. "She felt judged and unwelcome. You know, Veronica is very sensitive to criticism. She's had a difficult past." I stayed silent. I'd heard that excuse before. A difficult past used as a free pass for terrible behavior in the present. In my experience, a past could be an explanation, but it was never an excuse. "And Mom," Leo's voice suddenly turned more serious. "Her comments about the house, that was constructive feedback. She's a visionary. She just sees the potential of the place while you're too stuck in the past." "Stuck in the past?" I whispered. "Leo, that was your father's home. It's my life." "Exactly. But life moves on," he replied, and the cruelty of it stung. "And because of that, I think you owe Veronica an apology." The demand hung in the air between us, cold and absurd. An apology. I was supposed to apologize to the woman who came into my home, insulted me, and schemed to take it over? The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. But I didn't. I felt a profound sadness, a crushing weight of disappointment. This wasn't my son. This was a puppet, and Veronica was pulling the strings. "No," I said, my voice firm, without a hint of hesitation. "I will not apologize." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear Leo's heavy breathing. "I knew you'd say that," he said, his voice full of a prepackaged disappointment. Veronica said you would be stubborn." "Oh, did she?" I replied, feeling a cold anger begin to build in my chest. "Did Veronica have anything else to say?" "You know what, fine," he said, his voice shifting to irritation. "If you're not going to be cooperative, then don't blame us." He hung up. I placed the phone down on the table, the clatter of it against the wood-sounding final. "Don't blame us," the phrase repeated in my head. It wasn't me anymore. It was us. An alliance had been formed, and I was on the other side of the battle line. I sat motionless for a long time, staring at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. The initial anger had passed, leaving behind a painful clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a typical family squabble. This was a calculated campaign. Veronica didn't just want the house. She wanted control. She wanted to isolate me from my son, to paint me as a stubborn, sentimental old woman in his eyes, so that when she made her move, there would be no one left on my side. It was a classic tactic I'd seen abusers use time and time again: divide and conquer. That day, I didn't leave the house. I spent the time thinking, sorting through my tangled emotions. I pulled out old photo albums, looking at pictures of Leo as a little boy, with his bright smile and clear eyes. Where did that boy go? How could he let a stranger poison his mind in just a few short months? A sharp pain lanced through me. I wasn't just losing my peace, I was in danger of losing my son. And then, late that afternoon, the second attack came. Not by phone, but by email. A soft ping from my tablet, an ordinary sound that suddenly felt ominous. I opened my inbox. There was a new message from Veronica Vance to Amelia Thompson and CC Leo Thompson. The subject line read, "Family Partnership Proposal." My heart gave a single hard thud. I opened it. It wasn't a friendly letter. It was written in cold, emotionless legalese. "Dear Mrs. Thompson," it began, "following an internal discussion between myself and Leo, and based on our observations of the current situation, we would like to present a proposal to optimize the property's assets and ensure long-term financial security for all involved parties." I had to read that sentence twice. Optimize the property's assets. Involved parties. She was talking about my home, my family, as if it were a corporate merger. The email went on to list their concerns: the rising maintenance costs of the house, the security risks of an elderly person living alone, and the inefficient use of such a large space. Every concern was a carefully packaged insult. But the worst part was the attached PDF. My hand trembled as I opened it. It was a 5-page, professionally designed proposal, complete with the logo of Veronica's law firm in the corner. It laid out in excruciating detail the options for the house. Option A: sell the house, use the money to buy a smaller condo for me, and the rest would be invested in a fund managed by Veronica. Option B: keep the house, but I would have to sign over the deed to an irrevocable family trust, with Veronica and Leo as the trustees. Under this plan, I would be granted a lifetime tenancy right, but all future decisions about repairs, changes, or selling the house would be entirely theirs. A lifetime tenancy right. I would be a renter in my own home. I would have to ask my future daughter-in-law for permission to repaint a wall or plant a new flower bed. I scrolled to the bottom of the document. There, in small print, it read, "This proposal is valid for 30 days. We look forward to your positive response." I sat there, staring at the screen, and this time, I didn't feel sadness or disappointment. I felt a pure, cold rage, as sharp as a shard of ice. The sheer audacity of it. The calculated, methodical cruelty. CCing Leo was a masterstroke of malice, a way of saying, "Your son is on board with this. You are alone." This was it. This was the smoking gun. This was their plan, laid out in black and white. There was no more room for doubt, no more hope that this was all just some terrible misunderstanding. I took a deep breath, and then another. The anger didn't make me lose control. On the contrary, it made everything crystal clear. I was no longer a grieving mother. I was a woman under attack, and I would not back down. I got up and walked over to Michael's old printer. I printed out the email and the entire PDF. The whirring of the machine in the quiet house sounded like a drumbeat to battle. I held the warm pages in my hand. They weren't just words on a screen anymore. They were evidence. They were a weapon. I placed them neatly on Michael's desk. I sat down in his chair, feeling its solid strength beneath me. Their attack had been perfectly coordinated, but they had made one critical mistake. They underestimated me. They thought I was just a lonely, weak old woman who would be easy to bully. They didn't know I had spent my entire life fighting for people who couldn't defend themselves. And now, it was time for me to fight for myself. I looked out the window. The sun was setting again, painting the corner of the sky in fiery red, but this time, I didn't see its beauty. I saw the color of fire. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, what I had to do. The next morning, I was awake before the first rays of sunlight found their way over the mountain ridge. The gloom and hesitation of the day before were gone. Last night, after reading Veronica's shameless proposal, a strange calm had settled over me. It was the calm of someone who has made an unshakable decision. The anger wasn't boiling anymore. It had been forged into a core of cold, hard steel inside of me. I wouldn't be defensive. I would go on the offensive. I didn't call Leo. I knew it would be pointless. My son was now on the other side of the battle line, and anything I said would only be twisted and used against me. I didn't reply to Veronica's email either. Silence, I've learned, can be the most powerful response. It makes your opponent guess, makes them worry. It lets them know you're not playing by their rules. Instead, I did something I had put off for far too long. I opened my phone's contact list, scrolled through names I'd known for decades, and stopped at one, Sarah Collins. Sarah wasn't just my lawyer, she was my best friend's daughter. She'd grown up in this very kitchen, eating cookies I'd baked, and she knew my family's story. I needed someone who didn't just understand the law, but also understood my heart. "Amelia, are you all right?" Sarah's voice came over the phone, warm and full of concern. "I'm fine, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady. "But I need to see you. There are a few things with my paperwork that need updating." "Of course," she said immediately. "Do you want to come by the office, or should I come to you?" "Could you come here?" I asked. "I think it's better if we talk here." I wanted Sarah to see what I was trying to protect. I wanted her to feel the soul of this house. Sarah arrived late that morning. She walked in like a breath of fresh air from the world outside. She gave me a tight hug, and for a moment, I felt my resolve wobble just a bit. But I took a deep breath and led her into the living room. I placed the stack of papers I'd printed last night on the coffee table between us. "This is why I called you," I said simply. Sarah put on her glasses and began to read. I watched her face as she turned each page. The initial surprise quickly turned to disbelief, and then to undisguised anger. Her brow furrowed, and when she got to the part about the lifetime tenancy right, she let out a soft curse under her breath. When she finished, she looked up and met my eyes. "This is unbelievable," she said, her voice filled with outrage. "This isn't a proposal, Amelia. This is a calculated takeover. They're trying to legally strip you of everything." "I know," I replied, "and that's why I need you." I didn't have to explain much. Sarah got it all. She understood the audacity, the cruelty, and the sheer foolishness of Veronica thinking I would just roll over. "Leo," Sarah sighed, shaking her head. "I can't believe he's a part of this." "He's in love, Sarah," I said, and a flicker of sadness was in my voice. "And that love is blinding him. But I can't wait for him to see the light. I have to act now." "What do you want to do?" Sarah asked, her voice shifting into professional mode, sharp and focused. "I want to change my will," I said, each word clear and deliberate. "Completely." I had spent all night thinking about this. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision made in anger. It was a deliberate act, a statement of what I believe in. This house, this land, everything Michael and I built together, they aren't a prize for the greedy to fight over. They are a legacy, and a legacy should be passed on to those who deserve it. "Who do you want to leave everything to?" Sarah asked, her pen ready. "I want to leave my entire estate, including this house and everything in it, to the Blue Spruce home," I said. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. The Blue Spruce home was a center for abused and abandoned children on the outskirts of Boulder. It was where I'd started my career, and a place my heart had never really left, even after I retired. The children there, those broken little souls in need of shelter, They were the ones who truly needed a home. "Amelia, that is an incredibly generous act," Sarah said, her voice full of respect. "But what about Leo? You're not leaving him anything?" This was the hardest part. I took a deep breath. I love Leo more than anything in this world, you know that. But love doesn't mean enabling bad behavior. I will not use my legacy to finance his fiancée's greed. This isn't a punishment, Sarah. It's a lesson. Maybe it's the most important lesson a mother can teach her son. There are things more precious than money and property. I continued, my voice growing stronger. When Leo realizes his mistake, when he becomes the man I raised him to be, he will always have a place in my heart. But this house, this physical legacy, it will serve a greater purpose. It will become a safe place for children with nowhere else to go. Michael would have wanted this. Sarah looked at me for a long moment, then she nodded, an understanding smile on her face. "I get it," she said, "and I think it's the right decision. We'll draft it. We'll make it ironclad. We'll include a no-contest clause to stop any attempt to challenge the will later. We will make sure your wishes are carried out. Absolutely." We worked together all afternoon. Sarah asked sharp questions, making sure I'd thought through every angle. We talked about naming an executor, about writing a separate letter explaining my reasons clearly, so no one could ever twist it into the act of a confused or manipulated old woman. When Sarah left, the sun was beginning to dip behind the peaks. She hugged me again, this time a hug of alliance. "You're a lot stronger than they think you are, Amelia," she said. "A mother of a son has to be," I replied with a sad smile. After she was gone, I didn't feel a sense of triumph or victory. I just felt a heavy kind of peace. I had done what I had to do. I had drawn a line in the sand. I had turned my home from a target of greed into a symbol of grace. I went out to the back garden, where the afternoon air was turning cool. I touched the delicate rose petals, feeling their softness against my calloused fingers. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I could ever mend my relationship with Leo, but I knew one thing for sure. I would not let the darkness of greed swallow the light of this home. The new will wasn't just a legal document. It was the final statement of my life's values. It was my answer to Veronica's proposal. She wanted to turn this house into an asset to be exploited. Instead, I had turned it into a gift to be shared. My silence, it turned out, was louder than any screaming match could have been. A few days passed after Sarah's visit. I received no more calls from Leo, no more emails from Veronica. The house returned to its usual quiet, but it was a heavy quiet, like the eerie calm before a storm truly hits. I knew they were planning something. Veronica wasn't the type to accept defeat. My silence wasn't a sign of surrender, and she was smart enough to know it. It was a challenge. I went about my days as usual. I gardened, I baked bread, I read by the fire. I chatted with my neighbors over the fence, trading small talk about the weather and the greedy squirrels digging up our flower beds. But underneath it all, I was on alert. I was like a sentry on a watchtower, my eyes always scanning the horizon for a sign of the enemy. And then the sign came, not as a direct confrontation, but as something much more quiet and far more sinister. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was checking my email on my tablet, mostly just deleting junk mail, and then I saw it, a new email from Veronica. This time, Leo wasn't CC'd. It was addressed only to me. The subject line was simple, just a few thoughts. My heart beat a little faster, but my hand was steady as I opened it. The tone was completely different from the cold, corporate proposal. This time, it was sickeningly sweet, dripping with fake concern. "Dearest Amelia," it began, "I've been thinking so much about our conversation, or rather, the lack of one these past few days. I'm truly worried about you. Leo is too. We only want what's best for you." I snorted. Her words were as hollow as a cheap greeting card. "I understand that at your age, change can be frightening," she went on. "Facing complex financial decisions can feel overwhelming. Sometimes, well-meaning people around us can give advice that isn't really in our best interest." I paused, rereading that sentence. Well-meaning people around us. Who was she referring to? Sarah? My friends? She was planting seeds of doubt, trying to isolate me. But the next part was the real attack. "As an attorney," she wrote, I've seen so many sad cases where seniors, due to natural cognitive decline, make decisions they later come to regret. Sometimes, they even become victims of undue influence from people they trust. Undue influence. The legal phrase leaped off the screen and hit me in the face. It wasn't a friendly warning, it was a threat. She was building a narrative. She was laying the groundwork for a future legal battle, one where she would try to prove that I, Amelia Thompson, was not mentally competent to make my own life decisions. The email ended with a final punch, wrapped in a velvet glove. I just want you to know that the law has protections for vulnerable people. The courts can appoint a conservatorship to manage a person's estate and ensure their best interests are served. I'm not saying we're there yet, of course, but I do think getting an independent second opinion on your legal affairs would be a wise step. And then, as if to prove her good intentions, she included a few links. I hesitated, then clicked. They led to articles with sensational headlines like, "When Love Becomes Manipulation, Recognizing Elder Financial Abuse, The Conservatorship Battle, How to Protect Your Parents from Predators," and the most chilling one, 5 Signs Your Loved One is No Longer Competent to Manage Their Finances. I closed the tablet, a wave of nausea rising in my throat. This was an act of incredible cruelty. She was using her knowledge of the law, her weapon of intellect, to wage psychological warfare. She wanted me to be afraid. She wanted me to doubt myself. She wanted me to feel so alone and helpless that I'd come crawling back, begging for her help. I stood up and paced the living room. The kilim rug beneath my feet seemed to sway. My home, my fortress, suddenly felt unsafe. Veronica had found a way to breach its walls, not with force, but with poisonous whispers and cold legal terms. I knew what I had to do. I took a screenshot of the email and saved it in a separate folder on my computer. I named the folder Evidence. Then I called Sarah. "Sarah," I said the moment she picked up, my voice devoid of panic, only cold resolve. "She's made her move, and it's worse than we thought." I read Veronica's email to Sarah, word for word. I heard her sharp intake of breath when I got to the part about the conservatorship. "My God, Amelia," Sarah said when I'd finished, her voice seething. "The audacity. This isn't just a threat. This is preparation. She's creating a paper trail so that if she takes this to court later, she can say, 'See, I tried to warn her. I was concerned about her for a long time.'" "So what do we do?" I asked. "We get one step ahead of her," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "We build our own paper trail, and ours will be built on truth, not manipulation." The next day, following Sarah's advice, I did 2 things. First, I went to see my family doctor, Dr. Evans, who had been looking after me for 20 years. I didn't tell him the whole family drama, just that I was updating some legal documents, and my lawyer had requested a general mental competency evaluation. Dr. Evans looked at me over his glasses. "Amelia, you're one of my sharpest patients, at any age. But if you need the paperwork, I'll get it for you." A week later, I had a detailed report confirming that I was of sound mind and fully capable of making complex medical and financial decisions. I placed it in the evidence folder, right next to Veronica's email. The second thing was harder. Sarah suggested I quietly inform a few trusted friends and neighbors about the situation. "If Veronica tries to go around planting stories about you being senile," Sarah explained, "we need people who can testify to your lucidity and independence." I invited Mrs. Henderson from across the street and Mr. Peterson from down the road for tea. They were good friends who had watched me manage this house on my own after Michael passed. I told them an abbreviated version of the story, not the bitter details, just that there was a family disagreement concerning the house and that some unpleasant rumors might surface. Mrs. Henderson put her teacup down and took my hand. "Amelia, anyone who says you're senile has a problem with their own head," she said firmly. "We're here for you." Their words were like a tonic. I realized Veronica was wrong. I wasn't alone. I had a community, a network of real friends. In the weeks that followed, I lived in a state of high alert. I saved everything. A text from Leo, his tone distant, asking perfunctorily about my health. Another email from Veronica, this time with an article about the falling risks for seniors who live alone. It all went into the evidence folder. My life settled into a strange new rhythm. On the surface, Nothing had changed. I still gardened and baked and read, but underneath, a second track was always running. Part of my mind was always on guard, analyzing every email, every text, like an intelligence analyst decoding enemy communications. The evidence folder on my computer grew thicker, a cold collection of clumsily disguised manipulation attempts. But the price of this constant vigilance was exhaustion, not a physical tiredness, but a wearing down of the spirit. To always be on guard, to always be suspicious, it drains you. The peace of my own home, something I had always taken for granted, was now a luxury. Every time the phone rang or a new email arrived, my heart would clench, just a little. And it was in that state, so stressed and wrung out, that the doors in my subconscious, the ones I'd kept bolted shut for 25 years, began to creak open. The past, which had been sleeping for so long, began to stir. It started with dreams, not clear dreams at first, just chaotic fragments, vague feelings. I'd dream I was walking down a dark, smoke-filled hallway, my feet sinking into a thick layer of ash. I could hear fire engine sirens from far away, the sound muffled like it was coming from underwater. I could feel the heat on my face, and that acrid smell of smoke, the kind you never forget once you've smelled it. Slowly, those fragments began to connect. The dreams became more detailed, more vivid, and much, much more terrifying. It was a late November night, the wind howling outside like a wounded animal. I shot awake, drenched in a cold sweat, the sound of my own screams still echoing in my chest. This time, the dream wasn't vague. It was clear in every horrifying detail. I saw myself in a child's bedroom, the walls covered in wallpaper with stars and planets. Everything was bathed in an eerie orange glow. Black smoke roiled across the ceiling like giant serpents. The heat was unbearable, and the air was so thick it was hard to breathe. I wasn't 7-2-year-old Amelia anymore. I was 4-7-year-old Amelia, a seasoned social worker, but no amount of training could have prepared me for this. I was kneeling on the floor between two coughing children. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, her golden hair now gray with ash, and a boy, a little older, maybe 9, trying to shield his sister. In the dream, I could feel their panic, the raw animal fear in their wide eyes. I grabbed their hands, one in each of mine. Their hands were so small and hot in my own. "Come on!" I yelled, trying to be heard over the roar of the fire. "We have to get out of here!" We started to move, crawling across the floor to stay below the thickest of the smoke. I could feel the weight of the responsibility of these 2 small lives depending entirely on me. The hallway was a living hell. Flames were licking up the walls, and pieces of the ceiling were starting to fall. And then it happened. A loud pop from behind us, maybe a gas canister or something. The force of it threw us forward. I stumbled, and in one horrific moment, the little boy's hand slipped from my grasp. I turned back, searching frantically in the blinding smoke. I saw the little girl was still there, clinging to my hand, sobbing. But the boy was gone. "Kevin!" I screamed, the name tumbling from my lips in the dream, a name I had tried so hard to forget. "Kevin, where are you?" But only the roar of the fire answered. And then, a huge section of the ceiling collapsed right where he had disappeared. I woke up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The nightmare was so real, I could still feel the heat and smell the smoke right there in my bedroom. I sat bolt upright in bed, gasping for air. Tears were streaming down my face, hot tears for a tragedy that happened a quarter of a century ago. That wasn't the last time I had that nightmare. It came back, night after night, a persistent, unwelcome guest. Sometimes I'd wake up with the guilt crushing my chest, the feeling that I had failed, that I wasn't fast enough, strong enough. Other times I'd wake with an infinite sadness for a life snuffed out too soon. Veronica's presence, her constant psychological attacks, had weakened my mental defenses. Like a dam with a crack in it, the traumatic memories I had suppressed for so many years began to leak through, and finally, they burst forth in an uncontrollable flood. I started to remember other details from that terrible night. The emergency call at 2 a.m, the way I had to argue with the fire captain to let me go inside because social workers weren't supposed to enter an active fire scene. The tear-streaked face of the mother, a Mrs. Susan Vance, as she screamed that her 2 children were still trapped upstairs, and the dead, hollow look on the father's face, a Mr. Jacob Vance, when I brought the little girl, Veronica, out, but not Kevin. I remember sitting in the ambulance with little Veronica, how she was coughing, covered in soot, but alive. And I remember the absolute crushing helplessness as I stared at the house being consumed by flames, knowing I couldn't go back in. These memories, they weren't faint ghosts anymore. They were alive, and they haunted my waking hours. I'd see Kevin's face in the clouds. I'd hear his scream in the wind. The old pain, which I thought had scarred over, was now split wide open and bleeding. One afternoon, unable to bear it any longer, I trudged up to the attic. The air up there was thick with the smell of dust and memories. I found it in a corner, covered in a thick layer of dust. An old metal box, dented on one corner, with the faded logo of the Department of Social Services. I had kept it, I don't know why. Maybe a part of me knew that someday I'd have to face what was inside. I wiped away the dust and opened the lid. The metal screeched. Inside was a single case file, yellowed with age. On the cover it read, "The Vance Family Fire, September 12th, 1998. My hand trembled as I turned the pages. There were a few photos of the scene, the house now just a blackened skeleton. There was the fire department's report, listing the cause as an electrical fault. And then, there was my report, handwritten on lined paper. I reread my own words, the handwriting of a 7-year-old woman trying to objectively document an event that had torn her soul apart. I described finding the 2 children, trying to calm them, how we started to make our way out. And then, I got to the part, following a small explosion, a portion of the hallway ceiling collapsed, separating me from the male child, Kevin Vance. Due to heavy smoke and intense heat, I was unable to immediately locate him. I evacuated the female child, Veronica Vance, to safety before the entire hallway became engulfed. The words were so dry, so professional, but behind them was a living hell. And then, tucked into the very last page, I found something I had completely forgotten I'd written. A letter, on a separate sheet of paper, not part of the official report. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Vance, but it had clearly never been sent. My handwriting in this letter was completely different. It was shaky, scrawled, blotched in places as if tears had fallen on the page. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Vance," I read silently. "There are no words to express the sorrow I feel for your loss. I was there. I was with your children in their final moments. I want you to know that Kevin was so brave. He didn't cry. He just held his sister's hand, and mine. I held on to both of them, but a piece of the ceiling fell and separated us. Kevin's hand slipped from mine like sand through my fingers. I can still feel it. I failed to bring him back to you. I didn't choose. I lost him. I am so sorry. I am so sorry I couldn't do more. I will carry the memory of Kevin in my heart forever." I folded the letter, fresh tears mingling with the old, faded stains. This was it. The raw truth of my pain. Veronica's manipulation hadn't just woken a demon, it had opened a grave. And now, I had to face the ghost that had escaped from it, all alone. I closed the box, but I knew no lid could ever contain them again. The past was back, and it wouldn't leave until it got the answers it was looking for. Opening that old metal box was like reopening a wound that had never truly healed. Everything changed. The house wasn't my fortress anymore. It had become a theater where the tragic play of the past was reenacted night after night. The nightmare of the fire was no longer an occasional visitor. It became a dreadful bedfellow, visiting me almost every night, leaving behind sweat-dampened sheets and a heart heavy with guilt. During the day, I tried to keep busy. I threw myself into gardening with an almost frantic energy, pulling weeds as if I were trying to rip the toxic memories from my mind. I baked, batch after batch of cookies, filling the house with the sweet smells of cinnamon and vanilla in a desperate attempt to overpower the phantom smell of smoke that still lingered in the air. But ghosts don't care about the smell of baking. They stayed. I saw Kevin's face in the clouds that drifted over the Flatirons. I heard him call my name in the creak of an old floorboard. The grief, which had been packed down and stored away in a dark corner of my soul, had now spilled out, staining every aspect of my life gray. I lost a few pounds. The dark circles under my eyes became more pronounced, a roadmap of sleepless nights. Mrs. Henderson from across the street brought over a pot of chicken soup, looking at me with worried eyes. "Amelia, are you doing all right?" she asked. "You look worn out." I just smiled and thanked her, saying I was having a bit of trouble sleeping. I couldn't tell her the truth. How could I explain that I was being haunted by a boy I couldn't save 25 years ago? How could I say that the stress of this war with my son's fiancée had shattered the careful mental walls I had built? And while I was wrestling with my own demons, the outside world continued its assault. Veronica, as if sensing my weakness, stopped sending threatening emails. She shifted to a new tactic, one more subtle and more vicious. She began to use Leo as a weapon. His calls became more frequent, but they brought no comfort. They were like little, dripping tortures. "Mom, just calling to see how you are," he'd begin, his voice trying to sound casual. "Are you eating enough? Getting enough sleep?" "I'm fine, Leo," I'd reply, my voice tired. "Oh, because Veronica was talking to a friend who works at Dr. Evans' clinic, and she heard you've been in a few times lately," he'd say, his voice deceptively innocent. "Is everything okay?" Of course, I hadn't been to the clinic. It was a bald-faced lie, designed to make me paranoid, to let me know they were watching me, that I had no secrets from them. Another time, he called and said, "Veronica and I were looking into long-term care insurance. They have some really good policies for seniors. Maybe you should look into it. It would help cover the costs if you ever needed in-home care or had to go into a nursing home." Every call was a needle, jabbing at the deepest fears of any older person. The fear of losing your independence, of becoming a burden, of being put away somewhere to be forgotten. They weren't talking about taking the house anymore. Now they were talking about taking my life. My breakdown wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, grinding erosion. Each sleepless night, each nightmare, each phone call from Leo, they were like drops of water on a stone. And eventually, the stone began to crack. I started forgetting little things. I left the keys in the door. I went to the market and forgot my wallet. I put too much salt in the stew. These were normal things for my age, but in this context, they felt terrifying. Each time, Veronica's voice echoed in my head. Natural cognitive decline. Was she right? Was I losing my mind? One afternoon, I was watering the plants in the garden, and I just blanked. I stood there, the hose pouring water onto an already soaked patch of daisies, my mind completely empty. It took a long moment for me to come back to myself. I turned off the water and sank onto a bench, my heart pounding. A cold fear washed over me. It was then, in my most fragile and vulnerable state, that I did something I would come to regret deeply. I called Leo, not to argue or accuse, but to ask for help. "Leo," I said, my voice trembling when he answered. I'm not doing so well." "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked, and for a second I heard real concern in his voice. "Do you need me to come over?" A flicker of hope ignited in me. Maybe, just maybe, my son was still in there, underneath the shell Veronica had built around him. "No, that's okay," I said quickly. I've been feeling a little lonely, and I keep dreaming about an old thing, an old case." I shouldn't have said it. It was a fatal mistake. "What case?" he asked. And so, I told him. I told him about the metal box, about the fire, about Kevin and Veronica. I told him through sobs, pouring out all the pain and guilt I had bottled up for years. I thought that, as my son, he would understand. He would comfort me. But when I finished, there was only silence on the other end of the line. A heavy, calculated silence. "Mom," he finally said, and all the warmth was gone from his voice. "I think you're obsessing. Maybe you should talk to someone, a professional." "No, Leo, you don't understand," I tried to explain. "I do understand," he cut me off. "I understand that you're under a lot of stress and you're latching onto a past tragedy. Veronica was right to be worried. You need help." And then I heard it. A whisper in the background. Veronica's voice, very quiet, but I heard it clearly. "Ask her about the silver bracelet." "Mom," Leo said, "did you keep anything from that case? Any kind of memento?" I froze. I had made an unforgivable error. I had handed them the weapon they needed. I have a small silver bracelet," I admitted in a tiny voice. "It was the little girl's. It fell off when I was carrying her. I think you should get rid of it, Leo said, his voice cold as ice. It's not healthy. It's just making you miserable. After that call, I sat in the dark living room for hours. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I just felt a vast, empty hollowness. I had single-handedly destroyed my last line of defense. I had shown them my weakness. I had shown them I was breaking. I knew what would happen next. They would use this story, use my pain, against me. They would paint a picture of a senile old woman, obsessed with the past, no longer able to care for herself. They would say the bracelet was proof of my mental instability. I was so tired of fighting. For a moment, I truly thought about giving up. Just sell the house, give them the money, and move somewhere far away where nobody knew me. But then, my eyes drifted to the mantelpiece, to the photo of Michael and me on our wedding day. He was smiling at me, his eyes full of pride and love, and I knew he would never have given up. He would have fought to his last breath to protect me and this house. And for him, I wouldn't give up either. I stood up and went to the attic one more time. I opened the metal box. I didn't take the letter or the report. I took the small silver bracelet, tarnished after 25 years. I clasped it around my thin wrist. It would no longer be a symbol of failure and guilt. From this moment on, it would be a reminder of what I had fought for in the past and what I had to fight for now. It was a reminder of two children, one who was lost and one who was saved, even if the one who was saved had now become my tormentor. After that disastrous phone call, I braced myself for the worst. I pictured letters from lawyers, calls from social services, maybe even a conservatorship hearing. I steeled myself, wearing the silver bracelet like a talisman, and prepared to face whatever they threw at me. But then, a strange silence fell. No emails, no threatening phone calls. Leo didn't contact me for over a week. This silence was more frightening than the attacks. It was unsettling. What were they planning? Was this the calm before a bigger storm, an all-out assault I couldn't possibly anticipate? I lived on edge for days, starting at every strange noise, checking my email and phone obsessively. The constant vigilance was becoming second nature. I spoke to Sarah every day, and she was as puzzled as I was. "They're playing a mind game, Amelia," she said. "They want to wear you down with worry." And it was working. I was exhausted. With each passing day, I felt a little smaller, my energy draining away like a candle in the wind. I still wore the bracelet, but it was starting to feel heavy on my wrist, a constant reminder of my own fragility. And then, one Saturday morning, as I was sitting listlessly by the window, watching the last of the leaves fall, the phone rang, Leo's name. I stared at it for a long moment. Should I answer? Was I strong enough to handle whatever he was about to say? Finally, I took a deep breath and slid my finger across the screen. I would not let them see that I was afraid. "Hello, Leo," I said, trying to keep my voice perfectly even. "Hi, Mom," he said, and I noticed the difference immediately. It wasn't cold and distant like before. There was a hesitation in it, something that sounded almost like guilt. "Mom, are you busy right now?" "No," I replied, my guard shooting up. "What is it?" He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him take a deep breath on the other end. I'm sorry, Mom," he said, and the words stunned me. "I'm sorry I haven't called. Things have been a little complicated lately." "Complicated?" I repeated, not letting myself be swayed by the sudden apology. "Yeah," he went on, and his voice sounded surprisingly sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about that fire, and I talked to Veronica." "Oh?" I asked, trying to figure out where this was going. She feels terrible," Leo said. "She had no idea how much that affected you. She admits she's been so focused on the future that she sometimes forgets to be sensitive about the past. She really wants to make things right." I stayed silent, listening. This was a new performance, more sophisticated than the last. They realized the intimidation tactic wasn't working, so now they were trying contrition. "And her parents," Leo continued, a little more excitement in his voice. "They heard about it too, and they were so upset. They said they owe you a thank you that they never got a chance to give. They really want to meet you, to officially thank you for saving Veronica's life, and also to apologize on their daughter's behalf." The mention of Veronica's parents stopped me cold. Mr. and Mrs. Vance. The grief-stricken faces from my memory. I hadn't thought of them as real people in years. They were just ghosts, supporting characters in my own tragedy. "Mom," Leo's voice turned pleading, "this is our last chance. One dinner, just one dinner. You, me, Veronica, and her parents. No talk about the house, no talk about money. Just a chance to heal, to start over. Please, for me, for me." Those two words were like a knife twisting in my heart. He knew my weakness. He knew that no matter how much he had hurt me, I would still do anything for him. I looked down at the silver bracelet on my wrist. Its dull shine caught the morning light. For a moment, I thought about refusing. I was so tired of their games. But then, another thought sparked in my mind. A dangerous, daring thought. If I refused, they would have another excuse to say I was stubborn and uncooperative. The battle would just drag on. But what if I agreed? What if I faced all of them, at once, in my own home, on my own territory? Veronica's parents. They were the one variable in this equation I didn't know. They were witnesses to the past, just like me. Maybe, just maybe, their presence would change something. Maybe, with all of us in one room, the truth would have a chance to speak. My old social worker's gut, the intuition that had seen me through hundreds of tense family situations, was telling me this was a pivotal moment. This wasn't just a trap, it was an opportunity. A chance to end this, one way or another. "All right, Leo," I heard myself say, my voice strangely calm. "One dinner, at my house, this Saturday night." "Really?" Leo's voice was flooded with relief and joy. "Oh, Mom, thank you. You won't regret this. This will be a new beginning for all of us." "We'll see about that," I said, and hung up before he could say anything more. I sat there, in the morning silence, and felt a shift in the air. It was no longer a passive waiting game. Now, I had a target, a date, a final battle. I stood up, feeling a new energy coursing through my veins. I would not let them control this narrative. I would be the director of this final act. I started to plan, not a plan for revenge, but a plan for the truth. I wouldn't prepare a fancy meal. I would make something simple and honest, the kind of food Michael and I used to eat. I wouldn't decorate. I would let the house speak for itself, with all its scars and memories, and I would not hide the old metal box. I went up to the attic and brought it down. I wiped it clean, polishing the dented corners. I placed it on the small table next to the fireplace, in a place where it was visible but not ostentatious. I didn't open it, I just let it sit there, a silent witness to the past, waiting for its moment to tell its story. I didn't know what Saturday night would bring. It could be a disaster. It could be a trap more elaborate than I imagined. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had walked through the hell of my own memories and come back. I had faced my own ghosts. Now, it was time for the others to face theirs. I looked down at the silver bracelet on my wrist. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a compass, its needle pointing straight ahead, towards Saturday night. Whatever the outcome, I knew that after that night, it would all be over. Saturday arrived under a gray, heavy sky, as if nature itself was holding its breath. I spent the day preparing, not with the cheerful energy of a hostess, but with the quiet focus of someone about to enter a critical negotiation. I didn't bake a pie or make anything fancy. I cooked a hearty vegetable soup, Michael's favorite, the aroma of celery, carrots, and parsley filling the house a smell of honesty, not pretense. I baked a loaf of sourdough bread, its crust crackling, its inside soft, a meal of simplicity, a meal of truth. I didn't set out fresh flowers. I just lit a few candles, their warm light dancing on the wooden walls, creating familiar shadows. I wanted this house to be what it was, a sanctuary, a place of memory, not a piece of real estate on display. The old metal box sat quietly on the small table by the fireplace, its dull surface reflecting the flickering candlelight. It was like an actor waiting in the wings, ready for the role of a lifetime. I wore a simple moss green sweater and my favorite pair of comfortable slacks. No makeup. I just brushed my silver hair neatly. I wanted them to see me, Amelia Thompson, not as a senile old woman to be bullied, nor as a wealthy matriarch, but simply as a person, in all my strength and fragility. The cool silver bracelet on my wrist was the only armor I wore. At 6 o'clock sharp, the car's headlights swept across the window. My heart gave a little leap, but I took a deep, calming breath. I walked to the door, the cold knob in my palm. The four of them stood on the porch. Leo and Veronica stood close together, a united front. Leo looked nervous, his smile strained. Veronica, in contrast, looked completely composed. She wore an elegant cream-colored knit dress, her hair perfectly styled. Her face was a mask of well-rehearsed contrition, her eyes demurely downcast. A masterclass performance. But my gaze went past them, to the older couple standing behind them, Mr. and Mrs. Vance. They were not what I had imagined. They didn't look powerful or wealthy. They just looked tired, worn down by life. Mr. Jacob Vance wore a frayed coat, his shoulders slumped as if under an invisible weight. Mrs. Susan Vance, small and thin, wore a faded cardigan, her hands clutching her purse like a lifeline. They both had sad eyes, the eyes of people who had seen too much tragedy. They didn't look like the parents of a high-powered lawyer. They looked like survivors. "Hi, Mom," Leo said, breaking the silence. "This is Veronica's mom and dad, Jacob and Susan Vance. This is my mother, Amelia Thompson." I nodded, not smiling. "Please come in." They stepped inside, bringing the cold night air with them. Veronica immediately launched into her act. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice dripping with remorse, "I am so truly sorry for my behavior. I was wrong. I hope you can give me a chance to." "We'll talk later." I cut her off gently but firmly. "Dinner is ready. Please have a seat." The interruption threw Veronica off for a second, but she quickly regained her composure and obediently followed Leo to the dining room. My eyes stayed on the Vances. They entered the house hesitantly, as if afraid of soiling the rug. Their eyes darted around, not with curiosity, but with a kind of vague dread. We sat around the dining table. I took the head of the table. Leo and Veronica sat on one side. The Vances sat opposite them. The air was thick with unspoken things. Leo tried to start a conversation. "Strange weather we're having, isn't it? Just last week it was so warm." But no one responded. Mrs. Vance just stared at her soup bowl, not touching it. "Mr. Vance looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the family photos on the wall, then drifting to the fireplace, and finally, it stopped. It stopped on the old metal box sitting on the small table. I saw him squint, a flicker of recognition, a faint spark of memory in his tired eyes. He nudged his wife. Mrs. Vance looked up, following his gaze. And then she saw it. A small gasp escaped her lips, a choked, painful sound. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "That box," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That metal box." Veronica and Leo turned to look, confused by her reaction. "It's just an old box, Mom," Veronica said, a hint of irritation in her voice. "What is it?" But Mr. Vance wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at me, directly into my eyes, and for the first time all evening, I saw a clear emotion in them, horrified recognition. "It's you," he said, his voice raspy and broken. I remember now. The name, Thompson, Amelia Thompson. You were the social worker. You were there that night." The room fell silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner suddenly seemed deafeningly loud. Leo and Veronica looked from her parents to me, completely lost. "What night?" Leo asked, his voice full of confusion. "Mom, what's going on?" But I didn't answer him. I just looked at Susan Vance. She was shaking, tears now streaming down her hollow cheeks. "You saved our daughter," she sobbed. "You carried her out of the fire. Veronica, you saved her." Veronica froze. She turned to her mother, then back to me. Her carefully constructed mask began to crack. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "The fire?" And then Jacob Vance spoke again, and his words fell upon the room like a hammer blow. His voice was filled with a pain that had been buried for 25 years. "Yes," he said, "she saved you. But your brother Kevin, he died in her arms." A dead silence fell. And then Veronica screamed. It wasn't a scream of surprise or fear. It was a raw, primal scream of rage, of pain, of a truth suppressed for too long and now bursting forth. She shot to her feet, her chair crashing backward. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You!" she shrieked, and in that moment, the veneer of the successful lawyer vanished, leaving only a hurt, angry child. "It was you? This whole time? It was you?" "Veronica, honey, calm down." Leo scrambled to his feet, trying to put his arms around her, but she shoved him away violently. "Don't touch me!" she yelled at him, then turned back to me. "Why? Why didn't you say anything? You were there. You saw everything." The truth was finally out, but it brought no relief. It brought a hurricane. "You chose me!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive mascara. "You left him behind. You let him die. You took him from me, from all of us." Leo stood frozen. Mr. and Mrs. Vance were openly weeping. And I just sat there, looking directly into the eyes of the screaming woman before me. I saw the hatred, the desperation, and underneath it all, the immeasurable pain of a child who had grown up with survivor's guilt. Her war had never been about the house. It was a twisted, misdirected revenge, an attempt to take something, anything, from the person she believed had taken something far more precious from her, her brother. The whole story, the months of psychological torment, it all snapped into focus. Her invisible scar was finally visible, and it was deeper and more painful than anything I could have ever imagined. My cozy dining room had become a courtroom. Veronica stood, breathing in ragged gasps, playing the part of prosecutor, victim, and witness all at once. Her accusations ricocheted off the wooden walls, off the old photos, off my own heart. "You owe us!" she wailed, her face red and distorted with tears and rage. "You owe him a life. You get to live in this house with all your memories while my family fell apart. We lost everything. We lost Kevin. We lost our home. We had to start over with nothing, always living with the guilt and the fear." Leo was stunned, completely overwhelmed by an explosion he'd never seen from the woman he loved. He looked at me, then at Veronica, his eyes pleading and confused, a child lost in a war between adults. "Veronica, I don't understand," he stammered. "What fire? Who's Kevin? What do you know?" Veronica spun on him. "You just see your poor old mother who needs protecting. You have no idea who she is. She's been the monster in my nightmares for 25 years. That's enough." "Veronica!" Her father Jacob spoke for the first time, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't you talk about her like that. She tried." "Tried?" Veronica let out a bitter, contemptuous laugh. "She failed. That's the truth. She chose to save the weak little girl instead of the brave boy. Was it because a girl was easier to save, Mrs. Thompson? Was it because he fought back, wanted to go find his parents, while all I did was cry?" Her questions were like poison-tipped daggers, aimed not just at me, but at her own memory, at her own survival. You see, she didn't just hate me, she hated herself for being the one who lived. I remained seated, weathering the storm. I'd seen outbursts like this before, in small therapy rooms where wounded souls finally let the monster inside them roar. I knew that arguing right now would be useless. That monster had to be allowed to roar until it was exhausted. "Why do you even keep that box?" She suddenly changed the subject, pointing toward the metal case. "What for? To remind yourself of your great victory? To pretend you're some kind of hero? When the truth is you're just a failure who let a child die?" "Veronica, please stop," Susan sobbed, trying to take her daughter's arm, but it was no use. "No," Veronica shook her mother's hand off. "I've been silent for too long. This whole family has been silent for too long. We buried this story like a shameful secret when we should have been screaming it to the world, that there's a woman named Amelia Thompson who ruined our lives." She took a step closer, her blazing eyes boring into mine. "Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up as a replacement? To look into your parents' eyes and only see the ghost of your dead brother? To have every birthday be a reminder that there should have been 2 candles, 2 presents, 2 children? You have no idea. You just sit here, in your comfortable little bubble, judging me, calling me greedy, when you're the one who took the most precious thing I ever had." Leo finally found his voice. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "what's she saying? Is it true? Were you there?" Before I could answer, Veronica scoffed. "Oh, of course she was there. She was our hero social worker. She has a whole file on us, doesn't she? She knows all our dirty little secrets." At that, I knew I couldn't be silent any longer. The storm had reached its peak. It was time to introduce a little light, even if it was just a flicker. I slowly stood up. Every eye in the room turned to me. The room seemed to hold its breath. I didn't look at Veronica. I looked at my son. "Yes, Leo," I said, my voice steady, filled only with a deep sadness. "What she's saying is true. I was there." Then, I turned to Mr. and Mrs. Vance. "And I am sorry," I said, "that I couldn't do more for Kevin. That is a pain I have also carried for 25 years. Finally, I looked at Veronica. I looked deep into her angry eyes, trying to find the 7-year-old girl I had carried out of the flames. "You're wrong about one thing, Veronica," I said, my voice still even and calm. "I didn't choose you, and I didn't leave your brother behind." "Liar!" she roared. "No," I said, shaking my head. "It's the truth. And you have lived with a lie, a burden you never had to carry for all these years." My calmness seemed to throw her off balance. Her rage faltered for a second, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. "Then what happened?" she demanded, her voice less of a shout now, but still full of challenge. "Tell me your version of the story. Tell me how you tried." This was it. The moment I had both dreaded and, in a way, waited for. The moment the truth had to be spoken. I didn't answer right away. I walked slowly to the small table by the fireplace. My hand trembled slightly as I touched the cold surface of the metal box. I picked it up, feeling its weight, the weight of the past. I brought it back to the dining table and set it down between us. The sound of the metal on the wood was a dull thud that echoed in the tense silence. I opened the lid. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air. I didn't take out the official report. I didn't take out the photos. I carefully removed a single sheet of paper, yellowed and creased. The unsent letter. I looked up at the 4 faces staring at me. My sons, confused and hurt. The Vances, full of anguish and a sliver of hope. And Veronica's, still hostile but now tinged with a raw curiosity. "I'm not going to tell you my version," I said, my voice softening. "I'm going to let the 4 7-year-old woman who was there that night tell you. I'm going to read you what she wrote, just days after the fire. Words she was never brave enough to send." The air in the dining room seemed to crystallize. The ticking of the grandfather clock marked each second, steady and relentless, as if counting down the final moments of an old world built on lies and misunderstandings. The 4 of them sat there, still as statues, their eyes fixed on the yellowed paper in my hand. I took a deep breath, the scent of old paper filling my nose, the smell of time and sorrow. I glanced at their faces before I began. Leo, my son, looked as if his world had just been turned upside down. Confusion and hurt were plain in his eyes. Mr. and Mrs. Vance held each other's hands on the table, their knuckles white. They were bracing themselves to hear the story that had haunted them for a quarter of a century, and Veronica, her rage had subsided, replaced by a tense, almost painful anticipation. I began to read, my voice shaky at first, but it grew steadier as I lost myself in the words of the past. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Vance," I read, "there are no words to express the sorrow I feel for your loss. I was there. I was with your children in their final moments." I looked up for a second. I saw Mrs. Vance bring a hand to her mouth, tears beginning to fall. Mr. Vance closed his eyes tightly, as if trying to block out the images. I read on, my voice becoming that of a younger woman, a woman still in shock and grief. "I want you to know that Kevin was so brave. He didn't cry. He just held his sister's hand, and mine. He told his sister that everything was going to be okay. He was a great big brother." A choked sob escaped Veronica's throat. He said that?" she whispered, almost to herself. I nodded, not looking up from the letter. "He did," I said softly, and continued reading. We were almost out. I could see the lights from the fire trucks through the smoke, but then there was an explosion. Not a big one, but enough to shake the floor. I paused, taking a shaky breath, preparing for the hardest part. A piece of the ceiling fell, right between us, like a wall of fire. It separated us. I still had Veronica's hand, but Kevin's hand. Kevin's hand slipped from mine like sand running through my fingers. I can still feel it. My voice broke on that last line. That feeling, the feeling of a small hand slipping away from your protection, it was as raw today as it was then. I screamed his name. I read on, my own tears now blurring the words. But only the fire answered. I knew I had to get Veronica out, right then. I didn't choose. I lost him. The room was filled with the sound of weeping. Mrs. Vance had buried her face in her husband's shoulder, her body shaking. Mr. Vance held her, but tears streamed freely down his own weathered face. Leo sat with his head in his hands. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Veronica. She wasn't sobbing. She was just sitting there, motionless, silent tears carving paths down her cheeks. The hatred was gone from her eyes. All that was left was a vast, stunned emptiness. The lie she had told herself for 25 years, the lie that she was chosen, that her brother was abandoned, the lie that had defined her had just been obliterated. I am so sorry. I read the last words of the letter, my voice barely a whisper. I am so sorry I couldn't do more. I will carry the memory of Kevin in my heart forever. I folded the letter. The fragile paper seemed to hold the weight of the world. I placed it back in the metal box. The play was over. The truth was told. A silence settled over us, but it wasn't the tense silence from before. It was the silence of truth, the quiet of a shared, unbearable grief. Veronica was the first to break it. "So, it wasn't your fault," she said, her voice hoarse and unrecognizable. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the empty space in front of her. "It wasn't anyone's fault." "No, honey," Susan said through her tears. "It was never anyone's fault. It was just a tragedy." "But I blamed," Veronica said, her voice full of self-loathing. "I blamed her. I blamed myself. I hated myself for surviving. I thought if I was strong enough, if I was successful enough, if I had everything, then maybe it would make up for losing him." She turned to me, and for the first time, I didn't see a sharp lawyer or a manipulator. I saw a lost 7-year-old girl who had been forced to grow up too fast, carrying a burden far too heavy for her small shoulders. I was cruel to you," she said, the words struggling to come out. "I tried to take your home. I tried to prove you were crazy. I'm sorry." That apology, it wasn't a tactic. It came from the depths of a soul that was breaking apart. I took a deep breath. My social work instincts told me this was a critical moment. This was where healing could begin. "I accept your apology, Veronica," I said, my voice gentle but clear. "But more importantly, can you forgive yourself? Can you accept that you deserve to live, to be happy, not as your brother's replacement, but as yourself?" She didn't answer, just shook her head hopelessly, the tears flowing again. Leo finally looked up. His face was pale, but there was a new clarity in his eyes. He got up, walked around the table, and knelt beside me. He took my hand, the one wearing the silver bracelet. "Mom," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I have been a terrible son, a blind fool. I let someone else's ambition and insecurity guide me. I didn't protect you. I'm so sorry." I squeezed his hand. "It's okay, son," I whispered. "You understand now." It wasn't a storybook happy ending. There were no grand hugs or sweeping promises. The wounds were too deep to heal in one night. But it was a beginning. The Vances eventually stood and came over to me. "Thank you, Amelia, Mr. Jacob Vance said, placing a trembling hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for telling us the truth, and thank you for saving our daughter." The evening ended in quiet. They left not long after, leaving Leo and me alone in the house. The soup sat untouched on the stove. The bread was never cut. The dinner of reconciliation never happened, but something far more important had been served: the truth. After they were gone, Leo just sat there staring silently into the fire. I knew he was wrestling with a storm of emotions: guilt, shame, anger at Veronica, and a deep well of pity for her. Finally, I spoke, not as a scolding mother, but as a social worker offering a path forward. "Healing," I said, "isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to carry the scars without letting them poison you. It's going to be a long road, for both you and for Veronica." He nodded, not looking up. "And you," I continued. "You have to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Love doesn't mean you give up who you are." He looked up at me then, and in his eyes, I saw the boy I raised again. A good, kind boy, now with a little more wisdom that had been paid for with pain. "I know, Mom," he said. "I know." The days after that fateful dinner passed in a strange, echoing quiet. My home was no longer a war zone, but it wasn't peaceful either. It felt like a battlefield after the fighting is over, the air still smelling of smoke and sorrow. Leo moved out. He didn't say much, just left a note on the kitchen table. "I need some time to think." I understood. His world, his belief in love and in himself, had been shaken to its very foundations. He needed space to sort through the wreckage. He would text me occasionally to ask if I was okay, short, guilt-laden messages. I always replied that I was fine, even if that wasn't entirely the truth. As for Veronica, she seemed to have vanished. Leo said she had moved her things out of their apartment, leaving no note. Her parents called me once, their voices tight with worry, saying they couldn't reach her either. "We're afraid the truth was too much for her," Mrs. Vance said through her tears. I was worried too, but in a different way. I know from experience that when deeply wounded souls are cornered, they have 2 choices. Either they shatter or they explode. And I had a bad feeling that Veronica wasn't the type to shatter quietly. The truth, instead of freeing her, had locked her in a new prison, one even worse than the lie. Before, she had a clear target, me, her perceived enemy. That hatred gave her purpose, a toxic kind of energy. But now, that enemy was gone. All that was left was a tired old woman who was also a victim of the tragedy. Her hatred had nowhere to go, so it turned inward, eating her alive. The survivor's guilt, which she had suppressed with arrogance and ambition, now roared back stronger than ever. Why her? Why not Kevin, the brave older brother? That question was surely echoing in her mind, with no answer, and in that desperation, a new, twisted and toxic thought began to sprout. She still owes me. Amelia Thompson still owes me a life, a future. If not the house, then it has to be something else. She has to pay for my survival, for my pain. A few weeks went by. Winter had truly arrived in Boulder. The first snow had dusted the mountaintops, and the nights grew longer and colder. I was beginning to feel a little peace return. Maybe, I thought, the storm had really passed. Maybe Veronica had gone somewhere to start over. I was so naive. It was a Thursday night, about 2 weeks after that dinner. A moonless night, the sky obscured by a thick blanket of clouds, making the darkness almost absolute. The wind howled in fits, rattling the window panes with a sound like weeping. I had gone to bed early, tired from a long day of raking leaves in the yard. I was jolted awake by a sound, a faint click from the back of the house. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding. Was it just a raccoon getting into the trash, or a branch snapping in the wind? I listened, holding my breath. Silence. Maybe I had imagined it. But then, I smelled it. A painfully familiar smell, gasoline. For a second, I was frozen in terror. The memory of the fire from 25 years ago came rushing back, horribly vivid. But then, survival instinct, honed over decades of dealing with crises, took over. I didn't panic. I acted. I slipped quietly out of bed, my feet making no sound on the wooden floor. I crept along the wall to the bedroom window that overlooked the backyard. I parted the curtain, just a crack, and then I saw her, Veronica, dressed in black from head to toe, her face mostly hidden by a wool hat. She was fumbling around near Michael's old wooden shed, where I kept my gardening tools and old furniture. In her hand was a small red gas can. My heart stopped. Her plan wasn't to kill me. I knew that. It was more subtle, and in a way, more cruel. She was going to start a small fire, just enough to cause damage, enough to terrify me. An accidental fire that would damage the house, forcing me to sell it cheap, or one that would bring in the insurance companies, creating a legal mess she could exploit. Or, more simply, it was an act of terrorism, a way of saying, "You will never be safe." I watched her shaky hands pour gasoline onto the wooden wall of the shed. She was clumsy, awkward, clearly not used to this kind of thing, and it was that clumsiness that led to disaster. As she tried to step back, her foot caught on a tree root. She stumbled, and the gas can flew from her hands, spilling its contents all over the dry leaves on the ground. The gasoline created a long trail, spreading dangerously close to an old garden lamp that Michael had installed, one that sometimes flickered. "No," I whispered, my hand pressed against the cold glass. And then, as if in answer to my worst fears, the garden lamp threw a spark. Whoosh! A wall of fire erupted instantly. The flames consumed the dry leaves and shot along the trail of gasoline, racing toward the shed with terrifying speed. Veronica let out a blood-curdling scream, a scream of pure horror and disbelief. Her plan had spiraled out of her control. The fire was far more violent than she had ever imagined, and in seconds, the entire shed was engulfed. The strong wind whipped the flames toward the main house, and they quickly caught the edge of the wooden porch. Panicked, Veronica tried to get up and run, but in her haste, she slipped on the damp night dew. I heard a sickening thud as her head hit a decorative rock at the edge of the flower bed. She crumpled to the ground, unconscious, right near the back door of the house, as sparks from the burning porch began to rain down around her. At that exact moment, the smoke alarms inside my house began to shriek. My entire world felt like it was collapsing, but in the chaos, my mind became strangely clear. No more fear, no more anger, only action. I ran from my bedroom, not toward the front door, but toward the bathroom. I ripped the thick comforter off my bed and soaked it under the cold shower. I threw the wet blanket over my head and shoulders, the musty smell filling my nostrils. I'd had training for this, even if it was just theoretical. I made my way down the hallway, smoke already seeping into the house, stinging my eyes. I didn't think about my son. I didn't think about my burning home. My mind was fixed on a single image: a girl lying unconscious outside, about to be consumed by flames. Not Veronica, the lawyer who had tormented me, but the 7-year-old girl I had promised to protect. I managed to open the back door. The heat hit me like a physical blow. The fire on the porch was roaring like a hungry beast. I saw her lying there, the ends of her long hair already starting to singe. Without a second's hesitation, I ran out. Using every bit of strength in my 2-year-old body, I grabbed the collar of Veronica's jacket and pulled. She was a dead weight. The heat was searing through the wet blanket, scorching my skin. I could hear the porch roof groaning, ready to collapse. "Come on, Amelia, come on," I grunted to myself, my feet slipping on the wet ground. I dragged her, inch by inch, away from the house, away from the danger zone. And just as I pulled her clear onto the lawn, I heard a tremendous crash behind me. The entire wooden porch collapsed right where she had been lying seconds before, sending up a shower of sparks that lit up the night. I fell to my knees beside her, gasping, coughing up smoke. I looked at her unconscious face, streaked with soot, and in the flickering firelight I didn't see an enemy. I saw a life I had just saved. Again. The sirens grew closer, the wail of the fire trucks tearing through the quiet Boulder night, a symphony of chaos and hope. I knelt on the cold, damp grass, coughing in fits, my eyes fixed on Veronica's unconscious face. In the ghostly light of the fire dancing on what was left of the shed and porch, her face looked fragile, almost innocent. The mask of arrogance and anger had been burned away, leaving only a person. Firefighters and paramedics swarmed my yard like an army. They worked with swift, practiced efficiency. One team focused on the fire, powerful hoses roaring against the heat. Another team rushed toward Veronica and me. "Ma'am, are you okay?" a young female paramedic asked, her eyes full of concern as she knelt beside me. "Are you burned?" "I'm fine," I gasped. But she hit her head and inhaled a lot of smoke. They quickly got Veronica onto a stretcher, fitting an oxygen mask over her face. As they carried her past me, one of the older firefighters, the captain, paused. He looked at the blistering burns on my arm, then at my smoke-stained house, then back at me. "You pulled her out?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. I just nodded, too exhausted to speak. "That was a brave thing to do, ma'am," he said. "You saved her life." I watched the ambulance speed away, its emergency lights flashing, painting the street red. I didn't feel brave. I just felt a bottomless exhaustion, an emptiness that went down to my bones. My home, my sanctuary, had been violated, wounded. A part of it was now ashes. Leo arrived soon after, looking like he'd just run from a nightmare. A neighbor must have called him. He bolted from his car, his face pale with fear. "Mom!" he yelled, running toward me. "Are you okay? What happened?" He threw his arms around me, and for the first time in months, I felt the real warmth of my son. I buried my head in his shoulder, and finally, I let myself cry. I cried for the house, for Michael, for Kevin, for Veronica, and for myself. The fire was eventually extinguished, leaving behind a scene of devastation and the lingering bitter smell of smoke. The shed was gone, just a blackened foundation. The porch was gone. A section of the back wall of the house was charred. My home bore a large, ugly scar. Veronica regained consciousness in the hospital the next morning. Leo was there, sitting by her bed, his face etched with exhaustion and misery. I was there too, in a chair in the corner, my arm neatly bandaged. When Veronica opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was my soot-stained but steady face. She blinked several times, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The memories of the previous night must have come flooding back, chaotic and terrifying. She said nothing. She just looked at me. The hatred was gone. The arrogance was gone. In her eyes, for the very first time, I saw something entirely different, a profound, shattering realization, an unconcealable shame. She had tried to destroy me, and in the end, I was the one who had saved her. The irony of it, the weight of that debt, was more than she could bear. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from the smoke. Just one word, but it held a universe of questions. "Why did you save me? Why didn't you just leave me there?" "Because it was the right thing to do," I answered simply. "Because 25 years ago, I couldn't save your brother. I wasn't going to let that happen again." Tears began to trace paths through the soot on her cheeks. This time, they weren't tears of rage, but of true soul-deep remorse. I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "Oh God, what have I done?" It was a long and difficult road after that. Veronica had to face the law. She was charged with arson and trespassing, but at the hearing, I testified. I didn't excuse her actions, but I explained the past tragedy, the trauma, the invisible scar that had poisoned her soul. I asked for leniency. As a result, instead of prison, Veronica received a sentence of strict probation and 1,000 hours of community service, and at my suggestion, the place she was to serve that sentence was the Blue Spruce home. And then, the rebuilding began. Not just of the house, but of our lives. 1 year later, my house no longer bears the scars of the fire. Instead, it has a new life. Leo, with all his talent and love, personally designed and oversaw the repairs. The burned-out porch was replaced with a beautiful open sunroom with large glass windows that look out onto the garden, catching the morning light. It was no longer a house just for looking back. It had become a place that looked forward. Leo had changed. The tragedy forced him to grow up. He was no longer a gullible man, easily swayed. He learned to stand on his own, to balance love with responsibility. He stood by Veronica through the legal process, not as a blind lover, but as a partner, helping her face the consequences and begin to heal. Every day, Veronica went to work at the Blue Spruce home. At first, she just did manual labor, cleaning, cooking, sorting donations. But slowly, the children there, children who also carried invisible scars, began to trust her. She read them stories, helped with homework, and simply listened when they needed someone to talk to. In helping others heal, she was slowly healing herself. She found her purpose, not in acquiring things, but in giving compassion. It was a late summer Sunday afternoon, 1 year after the fire. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass. We were in the backyard, which had been fully restored. Amelia, Leo, and Veronica, the three of us. We didn't talk much, just worked together. Leo was installing a new swing set he'd built by hand. I was pruning the rose bushes. And Veronica, she was carefully repainting the wooden bench where I had sat in despair during the darkest days. There was no strain between us anymore. Our relationship had been tested by fire, and what remained was a quiet understanding, an unspoken acceptance. As the sun began to set, bathing the garden in golden light, Veronica finished her work. She brought me a glass of iced lemon tea, a small ritual she had started. As she handed it to me, her hand brushed against the faint burn scar on my arm, a permanent reminder of that night. She paused, her gaze falling on the scar, and I saw a flicker of pain in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice genuine and free of torment. I smiled, a smile that held no sadness, only peace. I placed my hand over hers. "Scars remind us that the past is real, Veronica," I said. "But they don't define our future. They just prove that we survived." Leo came over, putting an arm around both our shoulders. "The swing is ready," he said. "Who wants to go first?" We looked at each other, and then, all at once, we laughed. It was a clear, unburdened sound that mingled with the golden afternoon light, the laugh of survivors. The laugh of a family, not a perfect family, but one that had been rebuilt from the ashes, stronger, truer, and more beautiful than ever before. I looked at my house, my garden, and my 2 children. The war was over, the fire was out, and in the peace of that sunset, I knew that this was the real victory. This was justice. And this was a happy ending.